All right, we are back for section 9 of criminology, which is all about labeling and conflict theories, which are some of my just personally favorite theories. I think they're very interesting and have a lot to tell us about not only crime, but the world around us and how we live our lives. So, first, our funny internet picture of the day. The funny quote from Keith Richards, and it actually it brings up a lot of kind of questions about what is crime and why are certain things criminal. Why is doing drugs criminal? In some countries like the United States, you can face many years in prison for doing drugs. In other countries, it's completely legal. In some countries, you can at least used to be able to get the death penalty for doing drugs. So why the difference? What is it about our different societies that kind of make doing drugs illegal in some places and not others? So to that end, first thing we're going to talk about in this section is labeling theory. And with labeling theory, essentially there's the short and swift version is there's some kind of initial deviance. Usually it happens when the person is a child, they do something wrong, and then they get labeled by some sort of authority figure, whether it's their parents, their teachers, the kids around them, whatever. They get labeled kind of as a bad kid. They become a deviant in the minds of others because of that initial primary deviance. Now, in a lot of cases, that child or that young person then kind of internalizes that label. Says, oh, these people in authority, these people who know me, these people who I kind of look up to and they have this high status, are telling me that I'm a bad kid or a deviant, thus I need to act that way. And of course, that's not like a conscious decision. That's not oh, I think I'm going to become a deviant now. It's a subconscious process where people are kind of internalizing those labels of what other people are calling them, right? So if you call a kid a bad kid, he's going to start acting like a bad kid. And then once they've internalized that label, they go out and they commit secondary deviance, i.e., other deviance that they wouldn't have otherwise committed except for the fact that they've internalized this label. Okay? They've done some research on this, and it's kind of as far as the research goes, but they did find that if labeling theory happens, it's much more likely to be due to informal processes than formal processes. So, in other words, it's the people around you saying, oh, you're a bad person, you're a bad kid, you are deviant, you're a no good criminal, and less likely due to things like going to detention, getting arrested, the police or the court systems, that kind of formal labeling. The informal, the people around us, the people we respect, are much more able to label us than the people, in authority, if that makes sense. These days, labeling theorists talk a lot about kind of the social construction of crime, i.e., what we were talking about in that last slide. Why is doing drugs illegal in some places and completely legal in others? It's not just random happenstance. It's not just, oh, that's the way it kind of worked out. There is a serious social component to why some things are criminal and why other things aren't, or why things are legal here and illegal there. I mean, think about things like bigamy, right? It is illegal in the United States currently to have more than one spouse. There are other cultures where that's not only legal but kind of expected. Like it's kind of a normal thing for men to have more than one wife or people to have more than one spouse. But here that's illegal, not just prohibited, but like a crime. Um, Drugs, another great example. Prostitution, illegal here, not legal in some other places. Homosexuality, in the United States it's legal. There are many countries on the planet where it's still illegal. There's a lot of crime that is socially constructed. And even in things where it's not, where it's kind of a cultural universal, or a you know, like murder. Murder is a crime essentially in every country on the planet. But what constitutes murder and what constitutes self-defense and what constitutes kind of justifiable homicide are all completely different around the world, based on the social construction of crime. So here, um, you know, if I find my wife cheating on me and I kill her, I'm probably going to prison for murder. Whereas there are still some countries on this planet where if you catch your wife cheating on you, you are perfectly legally allowed to kill her, right? So society has really shaped our criminal justice system in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. And that is um, a very important part of criminology and sociology and the study of crime, is to figure out exactly how society affects crime, and what social institutions are used to kind of justify and enforce different kinds of criminal codes and law enforcement and court and corrections behaviors, right? Which leads us into our next subject, which is conflict theory. Now, conflict theory is this giant umbrella term that really encompasses lots of different theories, that all kind of have, the one thing they all have in common is essentially the basic underlying assumption that because crime is socially constructed, the people who are doing the constructing are the powerful, right? The people at the top, the powerful ones, the ones with all the ability to make and enforce laws. And because they're the ones creating that social conception of crime, they're going to create it in such a way that they stay powerful and they get to kind of maintain their control over deciding the social construction of everything else, in addition to criminology, right? Kind of the first one of these, and one of the big ones even to this day, is class conflict theory, okay? This kind of really got started with a guy named Karl Marx, and I'm sure you've all heard of Karl Marx. He's, still being taught in high school and college philosophy and history courses to this day, because he did have a huge effect on the world. And one of the things he talked about, one of the things that his followers continue to talk about, is how class really defines everything about a society. So for criminology, essentially Marxist conflict theory or class conflict theory says that the rich are the powerful, the rich are designing the laws, the rich are controlling the law enforcement, the courts, the corrections, the entire criminal justice system, and as such, they're going to use those things as a tool to maintain their economic power, right? And this chart here is one of the pieces of evidence that they use to kind of show how this happens, right? So basically what this chart says is that the poorer your parents are, the vastly more likely you are to wind up in jail and or prison at some point in your life. So the poor are much, 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 much more likely to end up in jail and prison than, or the children of poor people are much more likely to end up in jail and prison at some point during their life than the children of rich people. This is due to a lot of different factors, okay? There's a lot of different things at play there, but essentially what's happening in the background is that, according to these Marx conflict theorists, is that being rich, the system is designed by the rich to maintain that power structure, and as such, there are little steps along the way. There's nothing glaring. There's no, there's not like a law that says if you make more than $150,000 a year or something that you can commit this crime with impunity. But there are little things, right? For instance, the cost of a lawyer, right? So the quality of your lawyer is probably going to go up with your parents' income, right? Um, Other things like the neighborhood you grow up in, right? The neighborhood you grow up in is going to have a lot fewer opportunities for crime or um, criminal temptations if you're growing up in a nice neighborhood versus if you're growing up in a poor neighborhood. Quality of education. Um, there's lots of different things that kind of go together in the criminal justice system um, in order to result in this outcome. Um, the cost of bail. Rich people can afford bail, poor people can't. Um, Things like that all kind of combine together to result in this situation where poor people spend much, much, much longer amount of time or much higher rates of being in jail or prison. Um, so yeah. Next conflict theory we're going to talk about is feminist conflict theory, i.e., men and women. Now, at first you might say, well, women have far, far lower crime rates and far, far lower incarceration rates than men do. So what's feminist conflict theory? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't it be like, oh, men are getting the short end of the stick there? Well, it's not necessarily, just because women have a lower rate of crime and a lower rate of incarceration doesn't mean the criminal justice system can't be biased against them in a lot of ways. Okay? For instance, running away. Boys run away from home much more often than girls do. But girls are much more likely to be, when they run away, girls are much more likely to have their running away reported to the police. Because a boy running away is kind of sociologically seen as whatever, no big deal. A girl running away is still kind of seen as dangerous, not only to the girl herself, but to the family. That is a kind of a loss of equity, a loss of value for the family, because the girl children are still seen kind of subconsciously as more valuable monetarily or equitably. What's the word I'm looking for? More valuable monetarily, more valuable from a future. I can marry my daughter off to solidify our relationship with the Kingdom of France. That kind of thing is still in our society, even though we haven't married off our children for political reasons formally in a couple of 100 years now. But one of the most kind of interesting or I guess depressing statistics to come out of feminist conflict theory is this one. Okay, so when men kill female partners, girlfriends, wives, whatever, they get on average 2 to 6 years. Women who kill their male partners, i.e., boyfriends, husbands, whatever, are sentenced to an average of 15 years. Women are also much more likely, even in those cases where they're killing their partner, they're much more likely to have done it in self-defense, and men are more likely to have done it for possessiveness, abuse, or just during an argument, right? So why do women get such a much higher rate of incarceration than men do for killing their husbands or boyfriends? I mean, this is completely out of whack here, right? Now, admittedly, this statistic is fairly old. Okay, it's from before the turn of the century, the most recent century, obviously. But a more recent study, there was a study out of Ireland that said that men who kill or commit manslaughter against a female partner receive on average something like 3 years less in prison than men who kill somebody who wasn't their female partner. So there's still that sense internationally, not just in the United States, that killing a wife or a girlfriend is not as bad as killing other people. like morally, and thus the lesser sentences. Um, so feminist criminology is kind of trying to point out those issues, trying to find those very glaring problems in the criminal justice system where women are treated as lesser compared to men. And the third one we're going to talk about is racial conflict theory. Okay? And essentially what this says is that the system, the criminal justice system, and really, all systems, but in this case specifically, the criminal justice system was created by white people, kind of for white people, and is being used to maintain that racial status, that racial superiority, so the system is designed in a way that keeps minorities from obtaining positions of power. Okay, and there's lots and lots of evidence for this too, and I'm only going to have time here to talk about a small piece of it. First, the marijuana, right? So this is specifically from New Orleans, but it's reflective of a larger national problem. These statistics would hold in pretty much everywhere in the United States. So marijuana users nationwide are roughly equivalent, right? Black people and white people smoke and sell marijuana at roughly equivalent rates all across the country. In New Orleans, it's actually a little bit lower because New Orleans is something like 50% black, but they're only 37% of marijuana users. So it's actually slightly more racially biased toward white people amongst users. But when you look at the number of summonses, i.e. citations or tickets, and arrests for marijuana use, all of a sudden, black people are vastly overrepresented. Okay, they're roughly 50% of the population, but they're 79% of the arrests. Okay, and then when you look at just felony possession, it's even more biased toward black people. 94% of the felony arrests are black people, even though they're roughly equivalent in their use. Blacks and whites smoke marijuana, roughly equivalent rates. Black people get 94% of the felony possession arrests, even though they're only 50% of the population, roughly. So 50-60% of the population. This other graph up here is from the UK, right? Where black people use drugs less than white people, but they get stopped and searched by the police at much higher rates, which is reflective of the fact that the law enforcement system is built around I'm not saying that police as individuals are racist. I'm not saying that the laws, any individual law is racist, although you could make that claim, I think, in some cases. But there are little things that add up all along that criminal justice process, from deciding where police patrol, to how police patrol, to who they decide to pull over, to who they decide to search, to all these things. And just a little, a butterfly flapping its wings at one end of the system can result in this giant tornado at the other end, right? So even though any given police officer might not have any racist intent at all, they're still going to be part of a system where race plays a role in every step. And thus, when you get to the end of the line, i.e., how many people are in prison for drugs, each one of those little things has built up and built up and built up. So at the end, you get this giant racial difference in who's spending time in prison for drugs, specifically. But that same process can be seen all over the criminal justice system, from drugs to rape to assault, petty theft. All of these areas, um, race has a definite impact on how the criminal justice system treats them. And it's not any one piece of the criminal justice system. It's not any one person or group of people or any one law. It's a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there and a little bit there and a little bit there. And that combines to create these giant disparate outcomes at the end of the day. Does that make sense? So, what can we do about it, right? So we've got this social construction of crime. We've got crime being used as a tool by the power to maintain that power. What can we do about it? How can we kind of tone down some of these problems from both labeling and from these class and race and gender issues? Well, three of the policies that are kind of being proposed and being enacted in a lot of places over the country are diversion, decriminalization, and deinstitutionalization. Okay, diversion is essentially let's this thing is still going to be a crime, but instead of putting people in prison, let's get them some other kind of help. We're going to divert them away from prison or jail and into some other kind of system. And the most kind of popular form of this is for drug crimes or DUIs, where instead of going to prison for these things, especially on your first or second offense, you go to rehab instead, right? Because drug rehab, to try to get you to kick your habit, is a heck of a lot cheaper in the long run, and even in the short run, than sending you to prison for those crimes. So any chance we can take to, when you're convicted of a crime, instead of sending you to prison to punish you, sending you somewhere else so you can kind of fix the problem, is a much better policy from both a financial perspective and, in my mind, from a moral perspective. Decriminalization is essentially, instead of making this whatever it is, instead of making this action result in the arrest and detention of a person who's caught violating it, we're just going to essentially give them a ticket, right? We're going to take away the criminal penalty and up the financial penalty, right? So the most popular form of this in the recent times has been with marijuana, right? There are a lot of cities and states around the country that have decriminalized marijuana use, i.e. you're still not allowed to do it, but if you do get caught smoking marijuana, we're not going to arrest you for it. We're not going to take you to jail for it. We're not going to give you a criminal record for it. We're just going to give you a ticket. And obviously the tickets vary depending on what city and state you're in and all these things. But now, there are obviously a bunch of states where it's completely legal to smoke as much pot as you want, just like it's completely legal to drink as much alcohol as you want, as long as you're over 21. But even in the states where it's still illegal to smoke marijuana, if you're caught with less than, depending on the city or the state, it can be, a common one is an ounce. If you're caught with less than an ounce of marijuana, in the city I live in right now, you're not going to get arrested. You're just going to get a ticket, right? And the third one we're talking about is deinstitutionalization, i.e. if you're caught committing a crime and if you're convicted of committing that crime, instead of going to prison, let's figure out some other way that you can kind of be punished or serve your time. So that's an increase in probation, increase in community service punishments, things like that, to kind of keep you out of that jail or prison system that kind of not only labels you, but also costs society a lot. Both from a monetary standpoint and from a losing you out of the workforce and losing your family at home, having somebody get incarcerated could be a huge hurt for them. not only monetarily again, but also psychologically and emotionally. Having a member of the family being sent to prison is a big damage. So if we can deinstitutionalize, i.e., get people on probation instead of going to prison, we lower a lot of those costs. Okay. All right, that's the end of this section. Thank you so much. I'll see you for the next one.